No matter what challenges the world faces, the power of shared knowledge can help overcome them.
What UNU-WIDER does is provide knowledge that can inform policy, change lives.
Its research has provided answers to a variety of crises the world has faced.
It's a development economics institute led by the Global South.
It makes available data that's really creating a global public good that I don't see anyone else doing.
It's 1982, and a group of 24 academics gather at the London School of Economics. On the agenda is the failure of economics to understand and deal with the pressures of the outside world.
Privatization, deregulation, that was the dominant ethic in the advanced countries. For Africa, it was a disaster.
There was a sense that the way we measured economic well-being had to go beyond GDP.
In a word, a wider perspective. One of the founders, Amartya Sen, wrote this name on the wall, and the name stuck.
The way of arriving at WIDER was signifying World Institute Development of Economic Research. Together also implied something more.
Wider in its approach to disciplines that are outside economics, wider in its openness to different approaches to economics, wider in its reach across the Global South.
With a commitment to academic freedom, the institute was officially established in 1984 in Helsinki and opened its doors in 1985. Lal Jayawardena, a Sri Lankan economist and diplomat, was appointed the first director of UNU-WIDER. His dual background showed the new balance that UNU-WIDER was striking.
There were some American economists that described it as wilder while pursuing independent approaches which were not at that point orthodox, but which have since become so.
And one of the biggest issues in the 1980s was famine. Amartya Sen and John Dress wrote WIDER's first book, the groundbreaking Hunger and Public Action.
We made the case for the importance of public action in development.
It challenged conventional ideas about poverty and food security.
They introduced the ethical dimension of economics, a focus on hunger and poverty, on public action, but also on gender and women's rights.
Hunger and public action put UNU-WIDER on the map. It changed the way we thought about, ultimately, the capabilities approach.
Sen's capability approach shifted the focus from simply measuring poverty through income to assessing people's ability to lead lives they value, which started a whole movement in development economics. It changed not only the way WIDER worked, but institutions around the world.
The core ideas of putting the emphasis on capabilities that informed hunger and public action ultimately were the same core set of ideas that inform the human development approach. And that it's what underpins the Human Development Report that is still going on 35 years after that first report in 1990.
In that period, from the late 1980s to the early 1990s, was a really fundamental critique of structural adjustment programs that were implemented by the IMF and the World Bank. And WIDER's critique of structural adjustment had an amazing effect on the way, subsequently, the bank and the fund thought of structural adjustment programs.
I gave a talk at WIDER when I was chief economist of the World Bank, where I attacked the Washington Consensus. You might say I was a little bit of a traitor. It was really helpful having UN-WIDER to support.
As the world changes, so does UNU-WIDER's focus. In the 2000s, new challenges emerged.
In the early 2000s was a growing recognition that inequality was a threat to social cohesion and to economic development.
My predecessor, Andrea Cornia, established the World Income Inequality Database.
In my role at the UN, we use the World Income Inequality Database on a weekly basis. The information used makes an impact on policy. It goes to member states, it goes to the Secretary General, and UNU-WIDER makes a difference through their data.
Around the same period, there was also more and more evidence of conflict emerging in the Global South. That program that WIDER started in the 2000s is very much now part of WIDER's work at the current moment.
Currently, 1 in 7 people in the world are affected by violent conflict. We are trying to understand how people live in areas of conflict, how conflict affects them, trying to provide resilience to the most vulnerable populations in the world.
And again, one can see the history of the work we did on conflict and how important it has been over the last 20 years.
By the mid-2000s, WIDER was already looking into issues around inequality.
The richest 2% of adults own around half of global household wealth, while the poorest half hold only 1%. Now, that's the finding of researchers at the United Nations University World Institute for Development Economics Research.
When WIDER's book on wealth inequality launched, there was so much attention that the WIDER website crashed.
It was being released in lots of papers around the world, something like 500 over the course of a day. And we had all these requests for the downloads which were coming in at the same time, something like 25,000 requests during the first 24 hours. This was a new development, a new finding, and that seemed to have struck a chord in the world at that time.
It was a figure that inspired protest movements around the world. And following the financial crisis, austerity. With tighter budgets and a shift in attitude, bigger questions came up like, does aid actually work? And as ever, WIDER was there to do the difficult research to try to find a rigorous answer.
We used every methodology available to study that topic, and we find a surprising consistency around the return to aid. There is a high return to the overall aid effort.
And there were also questions on how poorer countries were going to industrialize in the 21st century. Could they follow the same path, or did they need a new one?
There was a problem of economic growth along with a lack of structural transformation, and productive job creation became a big challenge in these two parts of the world.
Is manufacturing still synonymous with industry? Or might there be a broader range of options that governments can think about to try to promote economic growth and structural change?
In that period, starting from the early 2010 to what we see now currently, UNU-WIDER produced a series of books on structural transformation, informality, job creation, inequality, such as The Developer's Dilemma, Industries Without Smokestacks, The Job Ladder, and so on.
Another key innovation has been the creation of tax databases to support increased tax income, domestic revenue mobilization.
In the 2010s, there were only 4 countries in the world, all in the global north, that provided tax administrative data to researchers. Working with UNU-WIDER, South Africa, a country from the global south, became the 5th.
It's really a breakthrough in terms of trying to understand what is happening.
WIDER has given us the space to work with them, to take credit for the research, and it has been a very different experience to what we have had with other international institutions.
Since then, a number of other developing countries have started making tax administrative data available for policy research, a true innovation.
5 years ago, when I was doing my PhD, none of the data was available, and we come to a point now where we can present our work from multiple countries at international conferences.
Despite being in a small Nordic country, the scope of UNU-WIDER has always been global.
Este programa tem papel estratégico na medida em que, para melhor orientar as políticas nesse sentido de crescimento inclusivo.
It works with local partners, governments and researchers from around the world, often supporting the careers of researchers and civil servants from the global south.
For a developing country, the most important goal you can have is to transform the structure of the economy. In order to do that, you need a lot of knowledge. We are not going to transform Ghana or any other African country without the skills that are required.
Long-term cooperation strengthens our research capacities.
What UNU-WIDER got me to do is asking questions, how does the research relate to policy?
It has held summer and winter schools and sponsored hundreds of research fellows over the last 40 years, many of whom have worked with WIDER for decades.
Enrolling into the UNU-WIDER program was actually a dream fulfilled.
One of the things UNU-WIDER does is facilitating the scholarship of young economists from developing countries. I am one example.
UNU-WIDER's work continues. Recent work includes SDG 8, the need for meaningful work, and a focus on women in work, on climate change and natural resources.
I see UNU-WIDER continuing much of the groundwork that had been laid by previous directors, but also increasing the focus on gender and informality and the sustainable development goals, which I think is so important.
And on innovative ideas that are ahead of the global debate.
This modest proposal for the 21st century, the billionaire tax.
Over the last 40 years, UNU-WIDER has shown its ability to co-create knowledge that has the power to improve policy and improve lives. Now, more than ever, the power of shared knowledge is needed to face the challenges of the next 40 years.
The goal of UNU-WIDER at present is to continue using evidence, using research, harnessing the power of shared knowledge to improve the lives of the most vulnerable.
They played, I think, a powerful role in shaping the discourse, the policy framework in the developing world. And so today, in a world that's clearly more uncertain, there's even a greater need for this kind of diversity of perspectives.
If you focus on asking the right question, you're opening up fields of inquiry as well as encouraging people to pursue more complicated research.